Hi friends, Ray from Honeytop Bees in South Carolina. Today I want to give you my top 7 essential beekeeping tips for summertime. Yes, it's summer and things are burning hot out here. Here are some of the things that I do in my hives to help maintain them over the course of the summer months.
Coming up.
I don't have any hair, but if I had any hair, I would pull it out. Hey, I'm glad that you joined me today. We're going to talk about some summer beekeeping tips. I first started keeping bees with my father over 50 years ago in New England. And things were very different then in beekeeping than they are now. And now I keep bees in the southeast corner of the United States. These tips, some of them might be a little bit regional, but I hope all of them will be of help to you today as we explore beekeeping tips. And these tips are mostly for beekeepers that have under 50 hives, backyard beekeepers, small-scale beekeepers like myself. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Tip number 1 might be the most controversial, but it's about ventilation. Now, I want you to understand a couple of things before I talk about how I ventilate my hives. First of all, I know there are some people out there that are completely against ventilation of their beehives. I understand, and when I lived up north, ventilation was not even a consideration. But now that I keep bees in a different region, I have a little bit different perspective than I had when I was growing up keeping bees in New England. The reason is the heat and the humidity that we have here in the southeast corner of the United States is sometimes relentless. Just yesterday it was 103 degrees on the thermostat, but the heat index was much higher than that, and the humidity here in the southeast is intense. If you don't provide any ventilation for your bees, they can survive. However, there may be some damage that happens as a result of it. There are studies that show that the brood cannot survive and can be up to a 95% loss when the temperature inside of your hive gets above 105 degrees. Your hive may not thrive over the course of the summer because they're not able to keep the brood alive. So what happens is the heat builds up inside of the hive during the day as the sun beats on the hive. And without some way for that heat to release, it begins to build up in the upper chamber of that hive. So providing just a little bit of ventilation in the top of your hive can help release some of that excess heat during the summer months when it's so intense. There's a couple of different ways that we do it. I'll show you how I do it with my hives here. What I use for ventilation in the summer months is this. It's a screened inner cover. I'll show you how it works. We have holes here on the side that are covered with number 8 hardware cloth. In the center, it's just a normal inner cover. A lot of people ask, well, don't the bees build up wax inside of that? And they don't. I've never had a problem with that, and I don't believe I ever will. I suppose if the colony ran out of room that they would. All this does is it just gives a place as the heat builds up inside of the hive. It comes up through the center here, and it gives a chance for the bees to be able to fan that excess heat off of the hive here much easier than if this was sealed over on the top. So a lot of people in my videos ask me about these. I get them from a company called Honey Run Apiaries, but you can make your own. It's just really a 1x4 with holes in it, and you can even nail your existing inner cover to the bottom of it. In the winter I leave these on, although I might cover up the holes for less ventilation, but I'll leave it on and I'll use it as a feeding tray. I'll put fondant on it here in the wintertime, but that's another video. We're talking about summertime, so right now it's just about letting that heat have a place to escape. If you don't have a screened inner cover, like I just showed you, you can just simply take a quarter or a nickel and stick it right in there, just like that. What that does is it just gives a little place for some air that comes in from the bottom, from the front entrance, to be able to escape. Every time air comes out of the hive up here on the top, it's drawing air in from the bottom, so it doesn't take a lot. But the concept of the thinness here is not big enough for it to be another entrance exit for the bees to have to guard, or for robber bees to be able to get in, but just thick enough for some air to be able to escape from the hive. Tip number 2, provide some clean water for your bees. The bees will thermoregulate their hives, and one of the ways that they do it is by going and gathering water crystals, putting them over the top of the brood, letting the heat absorb into those water crystals, and then as they begin to turn in humidity, to fan inside of the hive and remove some of that heat that is absorbed into those water crystals. It's like almost a water cooling system that they have. But it takes a lot of energy to do that. The less distance that they have to travel for water, the less energy they're going to use in order to try to keep that hive cool. Provide some alternative solutions for your bees when it comes to water resources. A simple bucket with something that floats inside of it works great. A bird bath with stones inside of it works just fine. A chicken feeder can work fine as well. And if none of those are available, they will find your swimming pool. Tip number 3, pay attention to your queen. Pay attention to your queen. Number 1, make sure your hive is queen right and deal with those issues as soon as possible here in the summer. You don't want to let it get too late into the year to where a new queen that the hive might be trying to raise is not able to find drones and be able to be mated. Or maybe she does get mated, but she doesn't make it back successfully to the hive, or something goes wrong and then they have to go through the process again. If your hive is queen right, pay attention to how well she's doing. Is she laying a good, consistent pattern? Is she getting to the point where she's 2 or 3 years old and she needs to be replaced before the winter? You have to deal with those issues now during the summer months, because if you wait until too late in the year, you might have a hard time finding queens, or it might be too late in the year to replace her and let her get established, especially if some of that requeening doesn't go well or right for you. Always remember that as we progress through the summer months and into the fall, she's going to be laying the brood that is going to overwinter with her. And so if she's not laying well, or if the hive is not pleased with her and it's going to supersede her later in the year, it's better for us to be proactive and put a good queen in there to overwinter and have enough brood to be able to sustain the hive through the winter months coming into the spring months for next year. I know it sounds crazy, but we have to stay ahead a season on our bees. Like, who wants to be thinking about winter right now? Well, you almost need to be thinking about winter right now so that your hive is going to be super strong through the fall and into the winter months. One more thing about that is make sure you mark your queen. If you haven't learned how to mark your queen yet, it might be a good time to learn how to do it so that you know how old she is and you don't have to guess if she's been superseded. You know, because your new queen, for example, doesn't have a mark on her. Like, pay attention to those things inside of your hive and you'll have a lot more confidence in making your decision about how old your queen is. Because you don't want to replace a brand new queen that just got mated because you didn't know that she was new and you thought she was your one from maybe 2 years ago because you never marked her. So marking can really make a big difference. Tip number 4. This is the time to really be paying attention to your mite loads inside of your hive. Now, I've got several videos on my channel about mite testing and the effect of mites on our honeybees, but it's at this time of the year that we find that our honeybees, the population is declining, but the mite population is actually increasing. Randy Oliver's got a great chart that's been pretty commonly shared across the internet, and you can find that on his website at Scientific Beekeeping, that explains that the mite population is at its highest level over the course of the summer. Here's why this is super important. If our bees going into the fall are infected with viruses or their immune systems are weakened by the effect of the varroa mite on their bodies, then they're going to be unlikely to be able to survive the winter. There's even some studies that are coming out from these huge losses we had this past winter that said, a lot of this still might be related to the varroa mite. And if those studies end up being conclusive, we've got to be more diligent in our mite testing and our mite treating than we have been. Now, the purpose of this video is not to explain to you how to treat for mites or how to test for mites, although I have videos on that, but just to be a reminder, you can't just use hope as your strategy. I got to tell you this. I find all the time with beginning or young beekeepers, this is what they say to me. They say, hey Ray, would you come on over and inspect my hive or whatever? And I'll ask them, what's your mite load? How many mites have you been seeing in your alcohol washes, etc.? And it seems like I hear the same thing over and over again. Oh, I don't really see any mites, so I haven't been doing any testing. I don't have any hair, but if I had any hair, I would pull it out, because new beekeepers are so reluctant to test for their mite loads inside of their hive. And as a result, their hives are dying over the course of the winter. And they always tell me the same thing. Oh, I didn't see any mites. I don't see any mites. And I like to remind them that it's very difficult to see mites on bees. They tend to gravitate to the underside of the bees and go between the platelets on the underside of the bee. So visually inspecting your bees is not a sufficient way to know what your mite load is. You have to test. And if you don't want to use alcohol, there are some ways that won't kill the bees. But again, just in my opinion, the most reliable way to get an accurate mite test is with an alcohol wash. All right, enough about mites. Watch my other videos on that if you would, because I'd like for you to be well informed about that if you're just learning about the effect of mites on bees. Tip number 5, be ready for getting stung. It's the summertime where your bees get the most defensive. You can open your hive in the spring and things are super easy. The bees are calm, they like you, they hum little songs to you. It's beautiful. Actually, beekeeping in the spring generally is pretty easy, and it's actually a lot of fun because we see the hive growing and expanding, and they're making wax, and they're bringing in pollen and nectar, and your hives are filling up with honey, and you have to add supers. It's wonderful. And then in the summertime, all of a sudden we go out to those same hives, and they just turn much more aggressive. This is common. It doesn't necessarily mean that your hive has Africanized traits inside of your bees. That can be a possibility, but most of us, the symptoms are just going to be that your hive is just going to be more aggressive. Those adult bees, there's nothing to forage on. They feel a need to protect their hive, and when you go in the hive in the course of the summer, you'll find that those same bees that were nice and calm and gentle and singing songs to you in the spring, all of a sudden might be really aggressive with you. Make sure you're wearing enough protective gear, and you're going to have to use probably more smoke. Now, I generally use a vapor smoker during the course of the year. And the vapor smoker works great for most circumstances, but I do find that in the summer, especially later in the summer, I've got to switch back to traditional smoke. The vapor is just not strong enough for most circumstances during the late summer months. And then they seem to calm down again as we head into the fall and into the winter. Tip number 6, do your best to prevent robbing. It's going to be in the summer months that your weaker hives are going to get robbed out by your stronger hives. So I've already had one of my hives been robbed out in the middle of June, which is about the earliest I've ever had a hive be robbed out before. Yeah, it was completely gutted. There was not a drop of nectar or honey left inside the hive, and I just made a video on it. You can see it on my YouTube channel. So how do we prevent robbing? Well, there's a few things that we can do, but just understand in principle that when a stronger hive smells the resources in a weaker hive, that they're going to try to overtake that hive and be able to steal those resources. It's a little savage out there, to be honest with you. There's a few things we can do. Number 1, separating your hives by a larger distance is certainly going to help if you have the ability to do that. Listen, if you have 5 acres and you have your hives 6 inches apart, that's probably a recipe for robbing. If you can separate them by 6, 10 feet, then go ahead and do that. Now, you might not have that ability, but it's definitely one thing that can help. Another thing that can help is putting an entrance reducer on the front of your hive. I know we already talked about ventilation. An entrance reducer seems to work against that. But if you had a screen bottom board, you can counteract the closing of the airflow that you have with the entrance reducer. That smaller entrance will give the guard bees less of an entrance to have to guard. Closing off other entrances to the hive, including the top entrance, can make it easier for the bees to have to defend their hive, especially if they have a weaker hive. Another thing that you can do to prevent robbing is make sure you don't stay in your hives too long in the summer months. You'd be surprised how in just 10 or 15 minutes in the peak of robbing season, how you can set off a robbing frenzy in your bee yard by simply taking some honey off and not covering it up. Maybe you're extracting or harvesting honey and you put it inside of a super and just leave it out there in the bee yard while you're working on other hives, and all of a sudden you can cause this big fury of activity. Or just doing a normal hive inspection and leaving that hive open just a little bit too long, you can trigger some sort of robbing activity inside of your bee yard. So you've got to be really mindful of that much more in the summer than you do in the spring or in the wintertime months. Some beekeepers will put robber screens on their hives proactively in order to reduce robbing. What this does is it gives the bees that are supposed to be there, they learn how to go in and out of the robber screen properly. But the bees that are just going to the scent in the front of the hive, they're not able to get to where they want to go and eventually will get frustrated. And then lastly, when it comes to robbing, avoid entrance feeders. And I would also say avoid feeding in your bee yard too close to your hives. So entrance feeders, other bees can smell them, they go in the hive, they start robbing the sugar water that you're putting there in that front feeder that sometimes is called the Boardman feeder, putting that in the front of your hive. That can definitely induce robbing in your in your beehive. And so if you have to feed a particular beehive, instead of feeding it in the entrance, I suggest feeding it internally, like with a frame feeder inside of your hive or above on the top with an empty super. Also, when it comes to feeding, if you're going to feed community feeding in your bee yard, like a pail of sugar water, or a 5-gallon bucket, or something that you're going to allow all your beehives in your yard to be able to feed off of, don't put that too close to your hive. I suggest 50 to 100 yards or on the opposite side of your yard, as far away as you can. You will notice that when you're community feeding, that there's going to be a frenzy of activity in your bee yard. And the bees are going to be looking for that source as they've been communicated to inside of the hive. Hey, there's free sugar water over here. And if you put that right in front of your hive, you can incite a robbing frenzy on other beehives right next to that sugar water. So put that sugar water as far away as you possibly can. Ask me how I know? Yeah, I know because I have actually incited some feeding frenzy inside of my bee yards by feeding open sugar water way too close to my hives than I should have. And lastly, number 7, let's talk about summer feeding. In some parts of the country, there's going to be a dearth, and that means that there's no or very little resources in the environment for your bees. And this summer dearth is very difficult for the bees. Hey, they're a living thing. They like to eat every day. If you've harvested some honey and taken some off, even if you've left some for your bees, it won't take that long for this big colony that built up in the spring to go through those resources. You've got to pay attention to the weight of your hives over the course of the summer. You've got to make sure that they still have honey inside of their hives for them to be able to consume and have carbohydrates. Without that, the whole reproductive system inside of the hive is going to shut down. How do you counteract that? Well, with summer feeding. Summer feeding to provide nutrition for your bees, and summer feeding to keep stimulating the queen to be laying over the course of the summer. And make sure that your bees are going to have enough carbohydrates coming in. Generally, pollen is not as much of a problem. That's generally pretty available year-round in most parts of the country. But the carbohydrates, the nectar, that seems to dry up over the course of the summer. And the length of your nectar dearth from whatever period your spring nectar flow ends until whatever you might have come in later in the year or the fall is really dependent on your area. So talk to local beekeepers. Our summer dearth is pretty long. It lasts about 10 weeks. Into June, July, and August, it is pretty pervasive. And so we have to feed pretty much during the summer months pretty consistently in order to keep our hives healthy and thriving. And it may be the same in your particular area. All right, so I'm curious to know, what are some of your summer tips? If you have some, please put them down in the comments below. Love to have you share with the community some of the things that you found are most important for your beehives in the course of the summer. Thanks for watching my channel. I hope you'll like and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. God bless, and I will see you next time.